seized the television station here. Walter Rogers, CNN, Moscow.
President Clinton continues to voice his
perhaps 1,000 or a few more at that time. Some perhaps 500 demonstrators reformed there today, but there had been a call for a major demonstration at October Square where this group came from. Probably, as I said, about 5,000 people who broke through police barricades repeatedly, marching along Moscow's Garden Ring Road from October Square, where there's a giant statue of Vladimir Lenin, a rallying point for these mainly communist demonstrators. They marched along that road past Gorky Park, over the Moscow River, past the Foreign Ministry, and on to the White House where we see them now. It's a huge crowd now massing behind the White House, listening to people address them. A very emotional moment for these people to have regained their turf.
Is it not true, Steve, that many of these people, if not most of them, are very, very disappointed in the way that the reforms have gone? They're not happy with these reforms, and they're certainly not happy with the speed in which they have taken place.
Well, these people are a core group, and I wanted to talk about that, Ralph, a little bit. A core group of people who have periodically demonstrated over the past months against Boris Yeltsin, against just what you said. Their disappointment in the way Russia is going, the reforms that Boris Yeltsin is trying to implement. They want the old Soviet Union back. They're rallying behind Alexander Rutskoy, a hero of the Afghan war, who has himself said inside that White House that it is time to try to reform the Soviet Union. Of course, that's a very difficult task in this day and age. So these are a hardcore group of people, very much opposed to Boris Yeltsin, very much opposed to his economic reforms, his political reforms, people who liked it the way it was when there was a Soviet Union and a Communist Party ruling this country. And the point should be made that while you're seeing some very dramatic pictures, we heard gunfire on live television, that most of Moscow is still calm. Virtually all of Moscow is still calm. A city of 9 million people with 5,000 of those people demonstrating noisily. So these pictures give you a very skewed view of how the country is feeling as a whole, I believe, but they certainly do show you the drama of this political standoff in its 13th day since Boris Yeltsin disbanded Parliament and ousted Alexander Rutskoy as his vice president and called for new parliamentary elections in December, later saying that he himself would stand for early elections in June. Ralph?
Steve, following up with what you were talking about just a moment ago, your best guess, the number of people who are opposed to the Yeltsin reforms and the ones who are supporting Yeltsin, who feel that his are the good ideas, the best ideas, who is ahead in all of this?
Well, Ralph, there's no good polling information nationwide, but best guess around here is that somewhere between 50 and 55% of the nation supports what Boris Yeltsin is trying to do, whereas somewhere between 16 to 18% are represented by these people who have again massed at the White House, who violently broke through police lines today and are supporting Alexander Rutskoy and Ruslan Khasbulatov and the 100 or so hardline deputies of the Congress of People's Deputies that are still holed up inside the White House, as I said, in this 13th day of the standoff here. So the broader support still seems to be well behind President Boris Yeltsin, with a small minority supporting Alexander Rutskoy and wanting to go back to the days of communism. Once again, with a picture of our live camera from the balcony at the rear of the White House.
And these are the people, I suppose, Steve, that don't even want to see any elections take place, correct?
The only thing that these people would like to see elections take place for is for president. But this crisis here, Ralph, seems to have moved beyond the issue of elections. We don't even hear talk about trying to negotiate over who runs for office or when, who runs for office or when. It's now just a raw and naked struggle for power in the country. With that gunfire we heard, it's moved even closer to a violent struggle for power. I find it hard to imagine that this day will close without some further violence. I hate to predict such a thing, but there is so much tension around the White House in these few square blocks with these masses of people shoved together, surrounded by troops with guns, and the soldiers and the police who tried to stop them have very much lost face, are in disarray, and I'm sure that there is bound to have been a goodly number of injuries along this march as the demonstrators broke through police lines. Injuries on both sides.
Steve, we heard about a week ago, I believe it was, that some members of parliament were saying if all of this doesn't get settled pretty soon, they're going to move to another city, just leave Moscow altogether. Have you heard any more about that?
No, there's Alexander Rutskoy preparing to address the crowd. He was Boris Yeltsin's running mate during their elections in June 1991. He was a close ally of Boris Yeltsin. Let's listen to him, see what he has to say.
Young people, combat-ready men, everybody should be forming detachments, and we should now attack the mayor's office under Stankenau, and we should assault those two buildings and win. Everybody who's strong enough, I'm asking old men and women to stay away from this operation. All the other ones who are combat ready, get together, form detachments, attack the mayor's office, and then let's move on to attack the Stankenau television center. Don't worry, all this scum of society will be put behind the bars. On behalf of everybody who issued orders to beat up the demonstrators, I was listening to these orders via this police radio. I am now appealing to the law enforcement agencies and personnel of the law enforcement agencies. You have just seconds before you can take the side of the people. I would like to warn everyone who is in these detachments. All your names are listed and you will be held responsible before the law. I ask you to defect to the people, and all the demonstrators, I'm asking to do this. Stand up, take positions on the left-hand side. Let us form detachments now and attack the mayor's office. Please be as disciplined as you can. It should all be a very organized matter. We should be doing it in a very...
Saying that the demonstrators should now form into brigades and attack the Moscow mayor's office, and far across town, the Russian television broadcasting center called Ostankino. We have tape now ready to go for you of what it sounded like here and what it looked like when those gunshots went off. Let's listen to that. Jesus Christ, we got to get live on this. Do you hear that, Alec? We got to get this on TV. Well, Ralph, we've just had the first serious shots fired in this crisis, and many of them, several hundred gunshots fired, as a crowd of 3,000 to 5,000 began moving towards the White House, broke through barricades. Just listen now, the gunfire has silenced itself for a few moments. There. See now the front of the White House from our camera on the roof of the CNN Bureau. Speaker still addressing the crowd of people gathered behind the White House, these 3,000 to 5,000 demonstrators who marched from October Square about 3 miles away down the Moscow Ring Road, breaking through police lines repeatedly as police fired tear gas and rubber bullets, climbing like so many ants over water trucks and barbed wire that barricaded the White House and retaken their demonstrating position. We've just heard ousted Vice President Alexander Rutskoy, formerly a Yeltsin crony and pal, a Yeltsin supporter at one time, now the most vicious enemy of the Russian president, ordering these people to form into brigades and attack the Moscow mayor's office and the television broadcasting center Ostankino. A big crowd still milling around at the end of Kutuzovsky Prospect here near the Moscow River, around the White House where this police interior ministry, this is a picture of the Moscow mayor's office right now. It's adjacent to the White House, just across the street, the former headquarters of Comecon, which was the Soviet bloc trading organization until the Soviet bloc fell apart. Inside that building, several thousand of these Interior Ministry troops have been billeted since this crisis really came to a head several nights ago when the cordon was thrown up around the White House and several thousand troops of the Interior Ministry began blocking the re-entry of demonstrators to the White House and the exit of the people inside the building, trying to force the exit of the people inside the building. For a time, all electricity, telephones, heat, and hot water were turned off to the White House. Those services had recently been turned back on as negotiations began under the auspices of the Russian Orthodox Patriarch Alexei II. There were hopes for a time that there might be some sort of negotiated breakthrough in this standoff. Those talks apparently are still going on, but are in recess at this hour, according to Mr. Rutskoy's people. The talks are going on with the deputy Voronin still meeting with the government side. There's a picture of troops going back up in front of the mayor's office, probably having heard this call from Rutskoy for an attack on the building. There seems, at this point, no major defection from the side of the Interior Ministry to the demonstrators, as the former vice president had called for in his brief remarks to this crowd.
Steve, Rutskoy certainly appeared to be trying to fire up the crowd as much as he could. Would you tend to believe that they are of the mood right now to follow his orders?
Clearly, the people who are trained military men who are inside the White House are in the mood to do that. Guns were passed out from the White House, and there were a lot of people, so-called defenders of the White House, these paramilitary groups inside there who were seen coming out of the building with guns as that gunfire was going off that we showed you the tape of earlier. So certainly they're in the mood, but you can see this crowd from our live camera at the back of the White House. And these don't look like the kind of people who can do much but march in mass. These are mainly elderly people. You see a lot of women in the crowd. None of these people, of course, are armed, and certainly not the kind of people who could lead their way back into see cars moving now in front of the White House. These are black Volgas, the kind of cars that would carry Russian officials. Obviously, we don't know who would have been in those cars. If it were some of the leadership from either the parliament or Rutskoy moving away from the White House, it would be very indicative either that they're going someplace in a hurry to talk to somebody, or they're getting out of the White House quickly, fearing what's coming. We can't see him right now, but speaking through that bullhorn is Ruslan Hasbulatov, chairman of the parliament. Just listen to what he has to say.
War and order that Muscovites, our people, our nation, will not allow anyone to usurp the power. And we have won. We have prevailed. I want to thank you all for being here. It's you guys who have defended the honor of this country. You have proved to all foreign propaganda workers who have been telling everyone that we're slaves, that we report to a dictatorship. You have shown them all that we're free people, that we're people who have honor and dignity, and we will not tolerate any usurpers for a single minute. I am calling on our courageous warriors to bring troops here, to bring tanks here, in order to attack the Kremlin and all the usurpers and the former criminals, including Yeltsin. Yeltsin should be put in the Matrosskaya Tishina prison, and all his sidekicks should be driven underground. There should be an open trial. I am asking everyone to get organized in order to attack and seize the mayor's office and the Ostankino television center. This is a beehive of criminals, of villains, of counter-revolutionaries. Dear friends, we today are beginning the most resolute attack against the bulwarks of criminals who have seized power from the people. I would like to thank you so much, my dear fellow countrymen, my dear Russians, my dear Muscovites. Thank you so much indeed.
That was Ruslan Khasbulatov, chairman of the banned Russian parliament, echoing the calls of Alexander Ruskoy, calling on these people to form up and attack the Moscow mayor's office just across the street. And across town, way across town, the Russian television broadcasting center, Ostankino, he also made a call on these people to form up and attack the Kremlin, where Boris Yeltsin has his office. A very, very fiery and dangerous speech at this moment, because these people still are surrounded by thousands of armed Interior Ministry troops. It's a picture now from our roof location where I'm speaking from, the Moscow's mayor's office. In that picture with orange water trucks in the front, those had been put there late last week when the Interior Ministry formed this cordon around the White House. It has now been broken by these demonstrators, some 3,000 to 5,000 of them. Took a long march from October Square and the statue of Vladimir Lenin along Moscow's Ring Road, breaking through police line after police line, undergoing attacks from tear gas canisters and rubber bullets, and finally reaching the White House, where they have regained their demonstration place at the back.
Steve, in light of Khasbulatov's speech a moment ago, and as you put it quite correctly, a dangerous speech, where does the military stand in all of this?
The military officially stands four square behind Boris Yeltsin. His defense minister, Pavel Grachev, has repeatedly said that the military stands behind Boris Yeltsin as commander-in-chief. We've seen no defections to this point from the Interior Ministry troops, a separate ministry from the Ministry of Defense. The military here is divided into the armed forces designed to repulse attacks from abroad. That would be the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, and the Interior Ministry, which is effectively a police force inside the country. But these are heavily armed soldiers, not just policemen, and they're trained to deal with problems just like this. We can see now at the back of the White House some of the trucks that were commandeered by these demonstrators as they marched toward the White House. It's difficult to see what's going on. Obviously, those trucks, which are troop carriers, have been brought in to move people. We don't know how many trucks they have at their disposal. However, we can see from our vantage point on the bridge, there are perhaps 6 to 8 to 10 trucks at their disposal. Ruskoy is down in the crowd, apparently, with a megaphone, trying to organize these people. You can see them forming up in line, standing at attention now. One of the men with a helmet on, others in civilian clothes.
All right, Steve, some local cable operators will be cutting away for a commercial message at this time. CNN's, and so will we. We will continue our live coverage from Moscow in just a moment.
bring
You're
you
gonna
up.
kill.
Do you realize just how much difference there?
Good morning, I'm Ralph Wenge in Atlanta. We are continuing our live coverage of the demonstrations in Moscow this morning that began about a half an hour ago when anti-Yeltsin demonstrators broke through the blockade of the Parliament building. Estimates say there are anywhere from 8,000 to 10,000 demonstrators there. Warning shots were fired into the air by riot police. Apparently, no one was hurt by these shots. Apparently, the police did not fire at the demonstrators themselves. The lawmakers have been inside for about 11 days now. Right now, we want to bring you the tape of the shooting earlier, about a half an hour ago. Let's watch.
We see it. Where are you guys now?
Ralph, from
All right, as we said, those were the scenes taped about a half an hour ago of the shooting from the riot police toward the demonstrators not being hurt. The man who has been watching all of this for us and reporting on it is our CNN Moscow Bureau Chief, Steve Hurst. Steve?
Ralph, most recently, Alexander Rutskoy, as you see a live picture now from our roof camera at the CNN Bureau. Alexander Rutskoy, the ousted vice president and Afghan war hero, was mixing in the crowd with a bullhorn trying to organize his forces behind the White House. That picture now live from behind the White House. Organize his people for an attack that he has ordered upon the Moscow mayor's office, and the Russian broadcasting center Ostankino across town. The crowd seems to have diminished somewhat behind the White House. Apparently these people moving off in other directions. But these attacks that have been called for by Rutskoy and Ruslan Hasbulatov, the chairman of the parliament, who even called for an attack on the Kremlin. Very inflammatory speeches in what has so far been a war of words that got a bit violent just a few minutes ago as these demonstrators broke through police cordons. Now we have another live picture from another vantage point. This is a skyscraper behind the White House. And you can see the crowd there milling around still. Some of the water trucks that had been brought in as barricades being moved around also. It was from this vantage point that several nights ago we showed you the overwhelming Interior Ministry force that had formed around the Russian White House, the Parliament building, now in the 13th day of what I would call a siege. The 100 or so deputies still holed up inside, led by Ruslan Hasbulatov and Alexander Rutskoy. We've had no official reaction from President Boris Yeltsin about this latest activity. It said 5,000 or so demonstrators broke through police barrier after police barrier, ran a gauntlet of tear gas and rubber bullets, moving some 4 miles perhaps from October Square back to the White House, where they've retaken their ground, their demonstrating position. There is a great deal of confusion. You see a line of police there in the lower part of that corner, the corner of that picture from our live camera behind the White House. The Interior Ministry troops sent out to block these demonstrators in complete disarray after they broke through line after line of them on their march to the White House. Ralph?
Steve, is there any indication that any of these demonstrators have moved toward the mayor's office as they were told to do?
Well, they are at the mayor's office. It's just a matter of if they get organized to attack. That's the picture of the mayor's office right now, the former Comic-Con building, which sits right at the end of the bridge over the Moscow River here on Kutuzovsky Prospect, where our bureau is. No sign yet of an attack, but there is a clear sign that these people are trying to organize something under the direction of ousted Vice President Alexander Rutskoy, who called for an attack on the mayor's office, for an attack on Ostankino, the Russian broadcasting center that is in the hands of Boris Yeltsin and has been used by his people clearly against what is really a fairly small group of people causing all of this trouble. Let's assume even that there are 10,000 people out there. Moscow's a city of 9 million people, and if we could move our camera farther on down the road, you would see people going about their business, shopping, and the city, aside from this small area around the White House at this point, is completely calm.
You said earlier, Steve, that the riot police were clearly outnumbered by the demonstrators. Have they brought in any more forces?
Would you please repeat, Ralph?
You mentioned earlier that the riot police were outnumbered by the demonstrators. Any indication of any new forces being moved in?
Not at this point. We don't see indications of that. I think that there are plenty of forces billeted in the mayor's building, which is just across the street from the White House, and also across the river at the Hotel Ukraine. There's the crowd moving towards the mayor's office. We can see smoke in this picture. I don't know what the source of that is. Some indications that might have been an APC, an armored personnel carrier starting up. Those have huge diesel engines and they would give off billows of smoke like that. This crowd now moving toward, there's the APC, you can see it now. Two of them moving away from the mayor's office, one more parked with its engine running as the crowd moves by it, up a ramp that goes to the mayor's building, the Moscow Municipal Building. A huge crowd of people heading towards that building. And there are a lot of troops, we believe, inside the building, all of them armed. You see the armored personnel carrier is now moving away from the scene. People running, mainly moving towards the building, some others moving away.
What kind of leadership do these demonstrators have, Steve? Obviously, it was Kozbelatov and Rutskoy who fired them up with their speeches a while ago, but who's leading them on the ground, do you suppose?
The people leading them on the ground are a dangerous group of people. There are mercenaries. There are people who are Afghan war veterans, people perhaps discharged from the military during the coup for their participation in the coup. They are former soldiers who have fought in places like Moldova, where there were bitter ethnic battles. Also, they've been fighting in Nagorno-Karabakh. Is that gunfire we hear from that camera? Yeah, I could hear from our camera location that you're seeing the picture from now, behind the White House, what appeared to be gunshots.
Steve, could you help us a little bit from your vantage point? Where is this crowd heading now? Where are they moving toward?
They're moving towards the Moscow mayor's office, which is just across the street from the White House. You can see those water tank trucks moving. That is a street that runs in front of the new American Embassy compound. There's a picture now from where I am standing on the roof of the CNN building. That's the Moscow mayor's building. Just to the left of that is the White House. And between the White House and, stop right there, that is the American Embassy, that red building, the new American Embassy compound. A lot of the activity going on is in clear view of diplomats who live inside that compound.
The demonstrators were told to storm the mayor's office, but were they told to do anything once they got inside?
They were told to attack the mayor's office. Ruslan Kozbelatov said that there is a beehive of criminals inside that building. That is where the Interior Ministry, loyal still to Boris Yeltsin, had billeted a few thousand troops as this crisis grew toward a head when a cordon was put around the White House late last week. What they meant by an attack, what was to happen when and if they got inside the building, we don't know, but I suppose the intention is to occupy the mayor's office and to evict the soldiers. Now, how that could happen, you have a group of basically unarmed civilians, a lot of older men and women in this crowd of demonstrators. What they could possibly do against the troops that we believe are still in that building with their guns, we just don't know. People still flooding across the street towards the mayor's building.
Steve, I'm not going to ask you to stand by for a moment. We are going to continue our live coverage from Moscow right after we take this short break. We'll be right back. Now, specifically, shortly after 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and about an hour ago, anti-Yeltsin demonstrators stormed the, broke through the blockade of the Parliament building, where lawmakers have been holed up for about 11 days now. The Parliament building in the square, nearby the mayor's office, the demonstrators also a short while ago told by their leadership to storm the mayor's office. And also in this same area, CNN's bureau, and atop the bureau, our chief, Steve Hurst.
Ralph, while we were in that commercial break, there was sporadic gunfire again. Just as we went into the break, we could see pictures of people from this vantage point running up that ramp near the Mir Hotel, the Peace Hotel, which sits just behind the mayor's office, between the mayor's office and the United States Embassy compound. As that running began, then we heard sporadic gunfire. It has now stopped again. These people have been ordered, as you heard earlier, by Alexander Rutskoy, the ousted vice president, and then that was backed up by Ruslan Khasbulatov, the chairman of this banned parliament inside the White House, to attack the mayor's office, also to attack across town at the Russian Broadcasting Center. A picture now of troops in flak jackets. This is moving across the bridge from our vantage point on the roof of the CNN bureau.
Steve, they are wearing flak jackets, as you point out, but we haven't seen any indication yet, have we, that the demonstrators are armed?
Yes, the demonstrators, some of them are armed, Ralph. When this, when the crowd first made its at that hotel complex where a goodly number of Western firms have offices. We haven't heard anything about casualties in there. It looked as if those two rocket-propelled grenades, if they were in fact that, bounced off the side of the building and didn't penetrate the building or hit an area where there was glass. Now, we see some APCs moving back in our direction from positions they had taken up near the Ukraine Hotel. To give our viewers an idea, that is probably 400 yards across the Moscow River, directly facing the Russian White House.
I'd also like to point out where the Mezh, the International Hotel, is. That is an approach road from Russian television. It may well have been that some of those attackers of Russian television came back. We know they were armed with those rocket-propelled grenades. They may have come back trying to re-enter the White House. There's a heavy line of troops along that perimeter of the White House, along that side of the White House near the Metropolitan Hotel, and they may have engaged in a street battle in which they launched that grenade against the Mezh.
And yet again, the crowd is changing sides of the bridge, but no sooner do they get to one side and others go back to the other. It seems like an interchange of curiosity seekers.
What's become of the black berets that we saw being deployed? Have they gone anywhere where we can see them?
I cannot see them with the naked eye. I don't know what our camera will show you, but I can't see that unit in the crowd. They did move into the crowd, and they may well have moved on past the end of this crowd down towards those water trucks. As a matter of fact, I think I know what's happening. They're bringing all of the bystanders off the bridge. They seem to have gone down to the barricade that was created by those water tank trucks. We can now see the crowd moving towards us en masse, and that says to me that behind them are those black beret troops who have finally moved in to get these curiosity seekers off that very dangerous bridge.
They seem to form a human wall that's pushing the curiosity seekers off. They had riot shields with them, some of them had automatic weapons, which they may be firing into the air to get the attention and tell people that this is serious, they've got to get away from them.
Moving crowds and the crackle of gunfire in Moscow right now. Our live coverage of the battle for the Russian parliament will continue in a moment.
All morning we've been telling you about the gunfire that has been occurring outside the Russian White House in Moscow between pro-Yeltsin forces, pro-Yeltsin troops, and anti-Yeltsin people who are holed up inside the Russian White House. We go now to ABC's Mike Lee in Moscow for the latest on the situation. Mike, good morning.
Good morning. We're located high in the Ukraine Hotel, as you can see, directly above a bridge. And the picture we're showing you now are riot troops dispersing a crowd, slowly moving them back from a barricade which they have been standing out most of the morning watching the gunfire. And as we slowly pan out, we can show you the scene, which is one of widespread devastation. You will see as we get further to the left the fire damage in the Parliament, that mainly from tank shells which have been fired into the building over the past few hours. At the moment, sporadic gunfire, not very much, possibly because we believe that soldiers are inside the Parliament building, perhaps going from room to room, trying to either capture people or to take custody of them.
Okay, Mike, thank you very much. ABC's Mike Lee in Moscow this morning describing the situation in that city as Boris Yeltsin's troops have been trying to get those people out of the White House.
It is a momentous and historic and a very sad day in Moscow as the huge Russian Parliament building known as the White House remains under a siege and occasional attack by Boris Yeltsin's government troops, still attempting to dislodge the 100 or so renegade parliamentarians, their defenders, and others still inside the building. A great deal of damage has been done to the building. Steve Hurst and Eileen O'Connor, although the fighting has been confined to, as you've noted, a relatively small area, that area has been heavily damaged, hasn't it?
It certainly has. The White House itself has been very heavily damaged. There's a fire still raging on the 6th floor of that building. The defenders of the White House had said that they had put out that fire, but it apparently has at least restarted. We can see lots of flames and now smoke coming from offices that previously were not on fire. The building itself was hit many times by armored personnel carriers from Boris Yeltsin's troops firing upon the building, and also from tank fire on the back of the building. Not within our eyesight or camera range is a bunker around which clearly there was a heavy gunfight early this morning. We haven't heard a lot of firing from there. That was the bunker from which the White House had stored most of its weapons and ammunition. But a lot of those weapons and ammunitions clearly were carried to within the White House last night. Every time the defenders of the White House thought they might be under attack, they did used to bring those weapons into the White House. They have automatic weapons, they have rocket-propelled, shoulder-launched grenades. They have claimed that they had surface-to-air missiles. We don't know. In Russia these days, it's very easy to buy heavy weaponry. Anything you want to buy, you can buy. Steve?
Indeed you can, and a lot of the horrible conflicts that are going on around the perimeter of the former Soviet Union are very much fueled by that weapons trade. The Russian army, though showing solidarity here today, has become a virtual peddler of arms. The men in outlying regions of the former Soviet Union selling arms simply to get some money to feed themselves and buy some cigarettes. Here's some gunfire again from the back of the White House, Bob.
Are you saying, Steve, that even civilians in Moscow and in Russia can buy this weaponry?
Absolutely. There is a burgeoning, what we call here mafia. It's just organized criminals, and they are all heavily armed, many of them with these AK-47 assault rifles. The city itself has become pretty much an armed camp among some circles. You can hear some more gunfire from the back of the White House building. The two sides are trading fire with automatic weapons.
Here you're seeing again that human wall of black berets stopping the bystanders who had gathered at the end of the bridge very close to the gunfire, stopping them from proceeding any further.
find it strange that although at this moment you hear gunfire from the back of the White House, that there has been this long, long lull in the heavy fighting that went on for so many hours earlier today. We have no signs that anyone has taken up Mr. Yeltsin's demand that they throw a white flag up and walk out of entrance 20 at the back of the White House. Does that indicate there's some sort of negotiation going on? We don't know, but certainly the big guns have been quiet for a long time now. We have a view down Kutuzovsky Prospect where black beret troops, some of them carrying AK-47 assault rifles, others with riot shields, finally got behind that crowd of onlookers and have pushed them so far slightly more than halfway back off of that bridge to get them out of harm's way. The tanks that were lined up on the bridge pointing their guns at the White House have now turned around and are pointing down the bridge, but their artillery pieces are still pointing at the White House.
Steve, I'm going to have to break in for just a moment. Some local cable operators in the U.S. will be cutting away now for a commercial message. CNN's live coverage of this battle for the Russian parliament will continue nonetheless.
Steve, the Black Berets appear to have done their job very effectively, judging from the sharp line there, beyond which we now see no civilians, no pedestrians rambling.
Indeed, Bob, this is very contrary to the scenes we saw yesterday when demonstrators broke through police line after police line, ran a gauntlet of tear gas and rubber bullets. These people are obviously just curiosity seekers and not eager to face down these riot control police that are slowly pushing them off this bridge and getting them out of the way. A lot of gunshots down where they were. We had a guest on the roof here of the CNN Bureau not long ago, Art Troitsky, who was among that crowd and reported that a lot of them were just school kids out on a lark, sort of dodging the bullets, thinking that was great fun.
Also, above that line of curiosity seekers, at times you can see at the bottom of the city building, the Moscow city building, there are some men moving around below that building. That building had been taken by anti-Yeltsin demonstrators, pro-Congress demonstrators, so it would be difficult to tell who and which side those men are on. They appear to be coming from within the Moscow city building and trying to cross a street which is covered by Yeltsin forces, and trying to cross the street and get into the White House. So it could be that they are anti-Yeltsin forces.
If we can see our picture of the White House once again, Steve, you mentioned earlier that a force of paratroopers had gone inside and was fighting its way up. Will you outline for us, as best you can, what you think is going on in there?
Well, obviously, Bob, we're not in there, but from what we have seen when we've been in there in the past, these men are going floor by floor, trying to clear the resistance, which I'm sure is very heavy because it's a maze of corridors that had been littered with safes pushed out of offices and filing cabinets to set up firing lanes. Also, the stairwells leading up to the various floors end in these hallways where people defending the White House could set up a crossfire on anyone coming up the stairs. So it's bound to have been a very, very tough fight.
All right, excuse me for a second, Steve and Eileen. For those viewers rejoining us following a local commercial break, CNN is bringing you live coverage of the crisis in Moscow, the ongoing siege of the Russian White House. We also remind you that for a current update of all the day's news, those who wish can tune to headline news, and we return now to our live coverage. So
inside the Russian White House, there would also be a lot of confusion. Those stairwells that Steve was talking about, there's several different stairwells. There's some stairwells that go to the upper parts of the one section of building that you can see towering above another tier of building. It's very confusing because one stairwell leads to one section of building, another stairwell leads to another section of building. Some of those stairwells are literally right next to each other. A lot of the stairwells are isolated within their own shafts, as you will, and so government troops coming up, especially if there were defenders firing out from doorways, they would be sitting ducks coming up with those stairwells.
Let us briefly recap, excuse me, just 1 second, Steve, for viewers who are just joining us. It is just after 6 o'clock in the morning, New York Eastern time now. To briefly recap, it was about midnight when Russian forces began their assault on the Parliament building. And as Steve Hurst has pointed out, there have been a number of very heavy exchanges of fire from both sides. In the 6 hours that have followed that, there have been untold casualties, and we mean literally untold. We don't know how many dead and wounded, presumably the majority of them inside the building. And the fighting, is clear from just watching our pictures, continues up to this moment. President Yeltsin has ordered those inside to come out, to surrender unconditionally. He has said the time for negotiating is over. Those inside the building, the acting president and the parliament chairman, Ruslan Khasbulatov, reject the notion of coming out and surrendering unconditionally. Steve, is that tear gas?
No, it's not tear gas, Bob. It's some sort of smoke screen that's coming out of one of those tanks. There are 4 of them there on the bridge on Kutuzovsky Prospect over the Moscow River. You can see it clearing now. The tanks started their engines, why we don't know again, as this crowd was being pushed off the bridge by black beret riot policemen. The smoke is now cleared. It may just have been one of those big diesels in those T-80 tanks starting its engine and blowing out the cobs, so to speak. Those tanks have periodically shot 125 millimeter artillery shells into the front of the White House at least 10 times, perhaps a few more times. They were lined up with their guns pointing directly at the White House. It's difficult to see right now. We have a live camera inside the Kremlin, and Siobhan Darrow, CNN's Siobhan Darrow, is there standing by with Sergei Stankiewicz, a top aide to Boris Yeltsin. Siobhan?
Go. Less than 2 miles from the White House, down in the Kremlin, Boris Yeltsin is in his office. He's closely monitoring the situation. He's been up all night, meeting with his top advisors. This morning, he's just met with his top military men. Joining us now to discuss the situation is close aide to Boris Yeltsin, Sergei Stankiewicz. Thanks for being here. Can you tell us what Mr. Yeltsin is doing, what he's feeling right now?
Mr. Yeltsin now is preparing to meet with members of the Cabinet of Ministers later in the afternoon this day, and he is preparing also for tomorrow's very important meeting with leaders of the Russian Federation. And he's going to find a long-term agreement with leaders of the Federation in order to stop any attempts to proclaim new republics or to challenge federal government in some other way.
Well, the provinces have thus far not exactly come out in full support of Boris Yeltsin. Does he expect trouble at that meeting tomorrow?
I think that now they will be more ready to come to agreement with the president because he showed his strength, he showed his ability to control the situation in the country. I think that now agreement is more than possible.
But is the situation going to be under control soon? I mean, there's reports of sporadic gunfire in other parts around the city. Is he going to be able to solve the problem today?
I'm absolutely sure that the situation will be quiet in several hours in Moscow completely, and we have the information that the situation is stable in the rest of the country.
When Boris Yeltsin addressed the nation this morning, appealing for calm, he also spoke of banning opposition and opposition demonstrations. Is this not going to just inflame the situation?
I think not. It's only an attempt to enforce the extraordinary situation imposed in Moscow. And at the same time, some political groups openly joined this military putsch and took part in street violence. Such kind of groups, after court procedure, should be forbidden according to the president's rule.
You've been speaking to Mr. Yeltsin all day. As he watches these pictures of the battle going on at the White House, what is he feeling? What is he thinking?
The president is really sad that he didn't manage to prevent this outbreak of violence. But he is at the same time absolutely sure that he did his best in order to continue negotiations. It depends upon his opponents now, and the full responsibility of this violence lays upon leaders of so-called White House.
You said that Mr. Yeltsin had just finished meeting with some of his top military men. How did that meeting go? What kind of orders did Boris Yeltsin give to those people?
The main order is to block this point of violence, point of battling around the White House, and to force people who are there to surrender and to lay down their arms. It's the main order.
Okay, Sergei Stankevich, close aide to Boris Yeltsin, thanks for joining us. I'm Siobhan Darrow, reporting live from inside the Kremlin.
It is, of course, not over yet, and we will resume our live coverage of this violent day in some of the streets of Moscow after this brief break.
Wounded. Military and police sources and Oman sources said that they had also had a lull in the fighting and had given an opportunity to the people within to allow women and children to leave. And that they claim when Oman troops were escorting some of the women and children away from the building, they were fired upon from defenders of the White House.
Did we understand you correctly, Eileen and Steve, that pro-parliament civilians are rushing the building and are being met by gunfire from Yeltsin forces on the lower floors?
That's exactly what we said, Bob. You can still see people rushing across the street that separates the Moscow Municipal Building and the White House. We've got several hundred. There was a news report of 700 people in the center of town. This is apparently that demonstration, a pro-parliament demonstration that was driven out of the center of town by riot police. At one point, a couple of hours ago, we heard a lot of gunfire from the center of the city that presumably was riot police probably firing into the air trying to get these people to move out of the area. They've got roving bands of people that's still moving about Moscow supporting the parliament, and they're going to considerably complicate this effort by the Russian government to take back the White House building, because they now find themselves with civilians at their back. I don't know how much trouble that can cause them, and armed White House defenders above them in the White House. Bob?
It has struck me that despite this upsurge in military power that's taken place overnight, there could still be more. And I've been a little surprised that I haven't seen larger numbers of troops on the streets themselves.
Well, Bob, I think primarily we have a lot of tanks here that can rattle the outside walls and send shells in through windows and certainly demoralize those people inside. And I don't know how many paratroops are inside, but apparently a sufficient number to the military's mind. More fighting.
All right.
Sufficient to the military's mind for this operation, Bob.
Steve and Eileen, I hope you two can find a place to close your eyes for half an hour. We're going to take a brief, we're going to take about a half-hour break right now, and we'll resume our live coverage. You will be doing live updates for us during CNN's Business Morning, which comes up shortly after this. Stay with us.
New laws say your car's air conditioning. Gangs, guns, and violence. It's a crisis in the nation. What's the solution for a society under siege? Get answers on a special series of reports on NBC Nightly News this week.
You smell like smoke.
Well, my hair was on fire.
Till she kicked.
Train service.
People in support of those who have been holed up in the White House 14 days now, having been pushed out of their locations in downtown Moscow by riot police, are now surrounding the east side of the Russian White House building. Apparently the forces of Boris Yeltsin inside the building too busy trying to take that building and fight off the defenders of the White House to look outside and try to scare those people away. We now
Tanks, take to the streets of Moscow. Good morning. It is Monday, October 4th. I'm Harry Smith.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Paula Zahn. Welcome to CBS This Morning. We're going to get you the latest from the bloody and chaotic scene in Moscow, as well as American reaction and analysis, plus a whole lot more. So stay with us on CBS This Morning.
Lots of business to take care of this morning, and events are unfolding even as we speak, and we'll talk to a lot of the principals involved and get you the very latest throughout the morning here on CBS This Morning.
Time to check in with Mark McEwen, who's back from the road once
Good morning.
again.
How are you feeling?
I'm feeling great.
Good. Countdown is on. How are you feeling?
Just terrific.
All right.
This is
Andrea, hopefully
Lamar's
feeling
refresher
just as
course
well.
tonight, so
All
time
right.
to make him nervous.
Let's talk about the weather here. Not too much bad weather. You can see absolutely gorgeous on the map. I'll tell you where it's going to be nice coming up.
It's time to get you the latest news this morning. In the heart of Moscow, troops loyal to President Boris Yeltsin are on the offensive against rebel lawmakers. Cindy Kennard has more from Moscow on the battle for the Russian White House.
Boris Yeltsin called up his toughest and most experienced troops overnight, and a section of the city of Moscow has been turned into an urban battleground. He did it less than 24 hours after declaring a state of emergency in the Russian capital.
The massive military assault began about an hour after the sun came up in Moscow. Battlefield tanks, armored personnel carriers, and elite troops stormed the Russian parliament's White House, which had been held by anti-Yeltsin parliamentary deputies and their armed guards for nearly 2 weeks. It was Boris Yeltsin striking back against parliamentary opponents whose followers rioted through the streets of the capital city all day Sunday, with the heaviest fighting around Russia's main television center, which Yeltsin forces nearly lost in a fierce firefight. The Russian president announced the storming of the White House on national television this morning, saying he had to put down the red fascist mutiny. As he spoke, his army tanks began pounding the building, firing several rounds into the White House main entrance along the Moscow River. They also fired their cannons at offices where Yeltsin's chief rivals, Alexander Rutskoy and Parliament Chairman Ruslan Hezbollatov, were believed to be. A couple of hours into the fighting, troops loyal to Yeltsin claimed to have seized several floors of the building, but still the battle continued raging for hours. There were reports Rutskoy was seeking peace talks, but Russia's prime minister said the only way out was absolute surrender. Remarkably, there were spectators, onlookers who stopped to watch the urban war being waged in their city. Helicopters hovered overhead, and there was no way to gauge casualties, although it seemed the parliamentary side was clearly outgunned, outnumbered, and had little hope of winning this battle.
As the battle goes on, it has become clear that what began as a constitutional crisis 2 weeks ago has now turned into a small civil war.
That was Cindy Kennard reporting from Moscow this morning. President Clinton is keeping a close watch on the unfolding situation in Moscow. The president is in San Francisco today, part of a 3-day swing through California to promote his domestic agenda. But he went out of his way to voice continued support for President Yeltsin. David Martin joins us from the Pentagon with the latest on White House reaction to events overseas. Good morning, David.
Good morning, Paula. This is sort of a good news, bad news story. The bad news obviously being that there is fighting and violence in Moscow. The good news being that the Russian military apparently is obeying orders from Boris Yeltsin to put down the hardliners holding the parliament building. If anything, this is exactly what the U.S. government has been looking for, because President Clinton suggested in some of his remarks yesterday that he felt that Boris Yeltsin may have waited too long before standing up to the hardliners.
President Yeltsin has bent over backwards not to have the soldiers fire on anybody, not to promote any violence, and he may be thinking today he went too far in that, because they basically got up ahead of steam and the situation got out of control.
As long as the Russian military remains loyal to Boris Yeltsin, he will enjoy overwhelming force in this confrontation. And I think the expectation is that he will put down these hardliners. And I think the only real question is how much violence he has to use, and whether he uses so much violence that it will undermine in this country public support for continuing aid to Russia. Paula?
If those troops remain loyal to Boris Yeltsin, does that lessen the fear that many Americans have, you think, about U.S. security and the huge nuclear arsenals that we continue to see in that part of the world?
It should, I think. I think the only real concern about those nuclear weapons, as long as they remain under government control, the U.S. does not have to worry about them. The only real concern is if there is all-out civil war.
Long-term remnant. What's next is obviously to move on to the elections process and continue with the reforms. And we're signaling our support.
Reporting from the State Department. In Somalia, fighting that left at least 5...
has said that he intends to restore order. If that means through additional force in the streets and rounding up those who oppose him, will we still continue to support him?
I think that we must support democratic leaders who are forced to use their police powers and their military power to put down efforts to try to change the system by force. And that was what was happening yesterday. It was not in that sense widespread, but it was targeted. It did not succeed, and I think that President Yeltsin, as a democratic leader, is bound to defend the efforts to try to return democracy and economic change and reform to the country.
How do you view, Mr. Ambassador, the potential for the fighting that is now centered in Moscow, spreading out beyond the environs of the city and into the countryside?
Brian, we've been watching it very carefully. As of now, we don't see any signs that that is happening, despite the many predictions that that was the case. And I think the people inside the Russian White House were fooling themselves with their own propaganda on this. We have seen the army move deliberately overnight, bring in elements of 3 divisions, be very firm in their effort, be willing to sacrifice people, and they have, and they've had to. It has been a difficult and bloody course. The resistance inside has been significant, if pinpointed, and we see that loyalty continuing, and we treat that as a sign that serious Russians know and understand the difference between a return to communism, which the people inside the White House would like to push, and the effort to continue the democratic reform process, which they supported so firmly in April.
But do you not see the violence having some residual effect on Yeltsin's call for negotiations and future elections?
I think we have to look and see who started the violence and where that violence came from. And you had, in a sense, these focused mobs yesterday overrunning police and barriers. The police were very cautious in not shooting then, tried to contain the situation. You had a man who then organized the mob to attack specific objectives. They didn't succeed in the main, particularly on the Ostankino television attack. But of course, the government then had to restore law and order, and they made a firm commitment to do so. And I believe we must respect their responsibilities to carry out those functions.
Final question. The embassy is in close proximity to the Parliament building. Is it secure?
The embassy has been secure. It has not been attacked. We had one Marine on observation duty wounded just as he was moving away from his observation post to return to the embassy. All of our people are safe. The women and children and families are in a gymnasium we have, which happens to be underground, and there have been stray shots that have hit the embassy, but none that we know of that have been pinpointed against us. We still have snipers in the neighborhood, so we're staying buttoned up.
All right, Thomas Pickering, U.S. Ambassador to Moscow. Mr. Ambassador, thank you very much. Stay safe.
Thank you, Brian.
We're going to go back to Moscow right now and talk with Andrei Kortunov. He is an analyst at the USA-Canada Institute in Russia, a Russian think tank. He's atop our NBC News Bureau in Moscow. Mr. Kortunov, good morning.
Morning.
How much in control of the situation right now is President Yeltsin?
Well, I think that speaking in terms of the military situation, he got his control over the situation in Moscow, and you can see that the violence is localized and there is traffic as usual in the streets of Moscow. However, in terms of political control, I'm afraid it's just the very beginning of a very, very long process.
During the attempted coup 2 years ago, we saw Yeltsin's supporters filling the streets of Moscow, yet they've not been as evident this time around. Why not? Where have they been? Where's Yeltsin's support?
Well, first of all, I think that the democratic forces are split, because even people who support Yeltsin can condemn him for the violation of the Constitution. After all, it was President Yeltsin who disbanded the Supreme Soviet and triggered the whole events that we saw here in Moscow during the last 2 days. Therefore, he is at least partially responsible for the bloodshed. On the other hand, I think that the society is less political oriented as it was 2 years ago, and many people simply do not care about politics any longer. They just mind their business.
What effect do you think the violence is going to have on his call for elections and on people's view of him in the streets?
I think that in terms of Yeltsin's political standing, it will erode after these events. I think that both branches of the power, the parliament or the former parliament and the president, have lost in terms of their popularity and public appeal. Therefore, we can expect new power centers, in particular the regional leaders, to come to the scene here in Moscow and to impose their rules of the game on President Yeltsin.
After the Parliament building is secured, what then? Do you see the violence being extended to the streets as the pro-Yeltsin forces try to take control of the streets of Moscow?
Well, I don't think so. I think that the opposition right now is not able to mobilize major forces and people to get to the streets and to support their cause. However, I think the danger is that by outlawing the opposition, Yeltsin is pushing the opposition to the underground, and we might see some sporadic violence, some random violence, and probably even some terrorist acts in the streets of Moscow.
Andrei Kortunov, thank you very much. 7-Eleven. Katie?
Right, we're going to head out to San Francisco, where White House correspondent Jim Miklaszewski has been traveling with the president. President Clinton, of course, is there.
The wind would carry them in the direction of the White House. They're about, I guess, a half mile now west of the White House, high in the sky. Small arms fire continues around the White House. We watch these three helicopters.
If men do emerge from those helicopters, they face, as Eileen told us earlier, the possibility, at least, of sniper fire from the roof of the White House.
That's absolutely correct, Jonathan. There were many men up there, about a dozen every night, sometimes less, depending on how cold it was and how they thought things were going. Those helicopters are right, literally above our heads right now. We can't get them right now from our camera position because they are right above our heads.
As we listen to those helicopters overhead, these motorized howitzers carrying Black Beret troops are on the move again, moving across the bridge on Kutuzovsky Prospect. They are headed directly for a line of water tank trucks that are used to wash Moscow streets. You see fleeing in front of them some bystanders who had been gawking from the bridge there watching this activity. They've gone by those two T-80 tanks, which have opened fire from the front of the White House building.
There are other major developments elsewhere in the world today. We'll have those stories after this.
Only you. Now, for the first time on TV, here are the Platters, with 40 of their famous original hits for you to enjoy.
This important day in Moscow, CNN correspondent Claire Shipman is there. Hello, Claire.
What you're seeing now are crowds outside of the front of the White House, and what we saw just a few minutes ago was a large crowd of people emerging from the White House. We saw a few white flags flying. We have not been told that this is a surrender. In fact, we have heard rumors that they may be bringing out wounded. But we did see two white flags flying and a large crowd of people emerging from the White House and some ambulances in the area, and there has been no gunfire to speak of for the last, well, there it is again, but it had been quiet for the last 5 or 10 minutes, so they may be evacuating the wounded right now.
Claire, when you say large crowd, I realize this is awfully imprecise. Can you take a guess at the size of that crowd that came out?
Well, the crowd, as massed as you see it now, seems to be at least 1,000, maybe 2,000 people. The crowd that emerged from the White House was probably somewhat smaller. There was a crowd outside that seemed to go up the steps to meet them, and they've merged together. We couldn't really give you an accurate estimate of the crowd that came out.
All right. Developments continue to evolve in Moscow. There are now then at least clearly somewhat fewer people inside the Russian White House now than there were half an hour ago and have been all night. Apparently some of the wounded being brought out, perhaps some others. CNN's Daybreak continues after this.
Finally, there's a TV that proves technology can make our lives easier. A Magnavox TV with a precise color picture, smart windows which preview other channels, and the unique smart sound feature, which ensures your volume will stay at normal levels no matter what comes on. Magnavox is so smart, I didn't even have to show up for this commercial. How'd I do?
Great, you were great.
The innovative TVs from Magnavox. Smart, very smart.
Falling dominoes show the power of momentum. One smart move can bring your company all the benefits of momentum. 70 companies have invested nearly $1 billion and created more than 8,500 jobs in Ohio because of the momentum started by the Ohio Jobs Creation Act. I'm Governor George Voinovich. If you want a plan to build momentum for your business, let me send you Bottom Line Ohio. To get your copy, call 1-800-345-OHIO.
At York, we carefully build and test our high-efficiency gas furnaces to make them so trouble-free. See, we know that cowboys, architects, and our future athletes need a carefree environment. So even if you're off to ski the slopes of Lillehammer, you can be comfortable with where you're headed. And no one knows more about making your world comfortable than your local York heating and air conditioning dealer. Find them in the Yellow Pages, your high-efficiency home comfort expert, York, making your world a more comfortable place.
The mayor of Washington, D.C. called out the National Guard after a child was murdered in her city. I'm Mary Tillotson. Has urban America become a war zone? The Army's in our neighborhoods. On CNN and Company, 11:30 Eastern today.
Recapping other top stories that we are covering in Somalia, unconfirmed reports that at least one U.S. soldier is being held hostage after heavy fighting in the capital, Mogadishu, that left 5 GIs dead, one reportedly paraded through the streets on a wheelbarrow. President Clinton's in California to push for his health care reform plan. Today he's to speak to the AFL-CIO in San Francisco. In New York, opening arguments begin today in the trial of 4 men accused of plotting to bomb the World Trade Center. A Los Angeles jury still deliberating in the trial of 2 men charged with beating trucker Reginald Denny. The Supreme Court is back from its summer recess today. The High Court's expected to take up a voting rights case that asks whether a Georgia county must change its form of government to give blacks a greater voice. House Minority Leader Bob Michel reportedly will not seek a 20th term. That comes from a report today in the Peoria Journal-Star that says Michel will announce his retirement plans today. A government report says thousands more Americans were pushed into poverty last year. The report blames lingering unemployment and the slow recovery from the recession. 26.5 minutes past the hour now. Mark McKay is in from the sports desk with a lot to talk about.
Yes.
Great sports day yesterday.
Certainly was. Bob, you can take away all the allegiances. The final day of baseball's regular season, nothing short of the fans' delight. For only the second time since divisional play began in 1969, 2 teams were tied for first place with 1 game to go. Atlanta and San Francisco set out on their opponent duties Sunday with the National League West title hanging in the balance. The Braves were the first to take the field, looking to keep their record clean against expansion Colorado. Ron Gant, with a 2-0 lead behind him in the 4th, goes to center field. Chris Jones cannot come up with a baseball. Otis Nixon scores, as does Jeff Blauser. It's a 4-0 lead as Gant pulls into third base. We go to the 9th. 5-3 Braves. Greg McMichael on to try and save it for Tom Glavine. And look at the defense in the field. Terry Pendleton, 2 outs. Now the final out as McMichael strikes out Darrell Boston to pick up his 19th save. So the Braves beat the Rockies and settle in to see what would unfold in Los Angeles. The Giants reinforced their game faces for this duel, but it didn't matter. Dave Burba in the 5th inning, and he is rocked by Mike Piazza. His 35th home run, first of 2 on the day. Corey Steiner then steps up and hits a 2-run shot. 6-1 at that point, 12-1. The Dodgers beat the Giants, so back in Atlanta, the party was just beginning. As the Braves players and about 8,000 fans stuck around to toast the team's 3rd straight West Division title with an impromptu celebration at Atlanta Fulton County Stadium. As the champagne flowed, the champs reflected on their 104-win season and their down-to-the-wire duel with Barry Bonds and the San Francisco Giants.
People that counted us out, you know, even after we've proven the last 2 years that we had a pretty good ball club and we were a better ball club this year, we felt, people counted us out. We'll look back at that.
The only good thing about it, I didn't have to see Atlanta on the same field.
It's not the best thing about it. I don't have to watch them parade around the field.
Atlanta will be afforded 2 days rest before the work towards securing a third straight National League pennant begins. Game 1 of the NLCS Wednesday in Philadelphia. Quarterbacks hit hard in NFL Week 5. Among the injuries, Philadelphia's Randall Cunningham gone for up to 8 weeks after suffering a broken leg in the Eagles' win against New York. Joe Montana's status up in the air after the Kansas City QB injured a hamstring in the Chiefs' victory against the Raiders. That's sports for now. Bob.
Thank you, Mark. And we will be back with more news at the top of the hour. In the meantime, a live update on events in Moscow coming up after the break, followed by CNN's Business Day. Stay with us.
Face it, tap water just tastes and smells awful. And buying bottled water costs a fortune, and it doesn't always taste that good.
That's right, Dick. In a blind taste test, Sterling Spring won hands down.
Introducing the Sterling Spring 4-stage water filter. Now get over a year's supply of clean, fresh, great-tasting water for just 3 cents a gallon. And it'll fit your tap in 5 minutes, guaranteed.
From our cooking to our coffee, Sterling Spring makes everything taste great.
Sterling Spring fits on top of or under the counter and was awarded the Water Quality Association Gold Seal. And its replaceable cartridge is validated to remove lead. Now it's yours for 3 low payments of $33.30. Order now and receive this gift certificate for an additional replacement cartridge, a $30 value, free.
Remember, good water is important to your health, and it shouldn't cost a fortune. Here's how to order.
To order your Sterling Spring for 3 low payments of $33.30 and receive your bonus replacement cartridge certificate, have your checkbook or credit card ready and call 1-800-257-1257 now. Or mail payments plus S&H to the address shown. Call now. COD's accepted.
This is CNN.
I'm Claire Shipman in Moscow. If you're just tuning in, we are continuing to cover the standoff that is now into its 7th hour between Boris Yeltsin's troops and the parliament defenders at the Russian White House. Just after dawn this morning, dozens of armored personnel carriers and tanks moved into the city to surround the White House. All morning long, there's been fire from the White House, return fire from the tanks and soldiers outside. The top of the Parliament building has been completely scorched, along with a nearby building. What we have seen just recently is that some people may have, in fact, come out of the building now. It appears that some wounded may have come out. Crowds are gathering in the streets. You can see the soldiers there trying to keep the people back. We will continue to keep you updated. Still no word of anybody offering to surrender at this point. And now we go to Business Day in New York.
We have the dollar mostly higher, as are gold, silver and oil, and indeed the world stock markets also mostly higher. We'll start our coverage with the US dollar. It is up only slightly against the European currencies with that fighting in Russia. It is not enjoying much of a safe haven role at this point. The dollar is up just a half penny on the mark, about a quarter cent higher on the British pound. It's actually down slightly on the Japanese yen. As for Treasury bonds, they're holding fairly steady. A slight loss for the 30-year bond. It's off 6/30 seconds. The yield is 6% even. And later on today, we should tell you the bond market will get figures on construction spending for August, a small rise expected there.
Another traditional safe haven, precious metals prices, only slightly higher this morning as traders eye the situation in Russia. We have gold up 60 cents at $355.60 an ounce. Silver gaining a nickel, it's at $4.09 an ounce. And oil prices, which jumped early on, now up just a bit. Fears of production cuts in Russia fading as traders feel the situation is becoming more stable. Russia is one of the biggest oil producers in the world. Right now, Brent North Sea crude is up just 4 cents, though, at $17.34 a barrel.
Now, the people who trade U.S. stocks in London predict a steady opening for the blue chips today. They say that despite the violence in Moscow, it looks like President Boris Yeltsin has the upper hand, and that is emerging as a plus for the stock market. Here's a stock that's already moving in London. It's Microsoft, down a quarter at at 81 3/4. The software company says it'll cut the price of an enhanced version of its Windows software. Here's two stocks to watch when Wall Street finally opens up. US West and 3DO. The Baby Bells expected to announce a deal today with a company called 3DO, Video Technology. It's all about interactive television. Stocks in Europe slightly higher this morning as fears about any negative fallout from the situation in Russia subside. At the moment in London, the FT 100 share index is up nearly 9 points at 3,048. In Frankfurt, the DAX index is up 10.5, reaching 1922. In Tokyo, though, the Nikkei average closed with a loss of just 18 points, nothing significant, at 20,264.
Joining us now from our London bureau live is Jane Peterson. She has more on the reaction in Europe to developments in Moscow. Jane?
Deborah, the foreign exchange markets have been relatively calm throughout Europe this morning, with traders assuming that Yeltsin will remain in the driver's seat. As long as that assumption holds up, they say the dollar may trade slightly lower through the rest of the day. Unlike the frenzy that often happens among currency traders when a crisis breaks, trading rooms like this one at Chemical Bank in London looked rather normal this morning. While the dollar is trading lower than it was over the weekend, traders don't expect much more of a slide, predicting a drop of perhaps another pfennig by the day's close.
There doesn't seem to have been a great deal of shock value in what's happened in Russia. These developments have been building up for a few weeks, and as such, the markets have had some time to discount these sorts of events. So the reaction has not been as substantial as other times in the past, such as the coup attempt, for example, where there was a much greater shock value.
Still, currency traders say in the unlikely event of a Yeltsin fall from power, the dollar would move quite substantially. In the short term to around 170 against the mark, and probably higher in the long term. On the equity side, the situation looks much the same. After an initial fall of about 1%, stocks quickly bounced back. Still, like their currency counterparts, equity analysts warn if Yeltsin's strength wanes, the markets will go wild.
The markets really have a bet that Yeltsin's going to win. If that proves to be wrong, then the correction could actually be reasonably severe, of the order of 2 to 5 percentage points in terms of market values. But that we have yet to see.
Of course, some analysts are surprised the markets have not reacted more, pointing out that even in the German market, which is traditionally the most sensitive to Russian upheavals, stocks have remained buoyant. So for now, the Europeans are taking the view that Yeltsin will remain in power. Unless that changes, you can expect both currency and equity markets to remain fairly calm as traders watch the crisis come to what they hope will be a quick conclusion. Deborah Stewart?
Thank you, Jane. Jane Peterson reporting live from London. And Business Day will be back in just a moment
with continued coverage of events in Moscow and world markets.
Paradise on earth, home of the ancient gods. The gods could have chosen any place on earth. They chose Greece, a warm land, where the spirit of the gods lives on.
The right start. The right perks. The right room. The right preparation. The right result. The right reward. The right way, the Wyndham way. Wyndham Hotels and Resorts.
Claire Shipman in Moscow with our continuing coverage of the Russian crisis. What you are seeing now are crowds gathered on Kutuzovsky Prospect. A few minutes ago, the defense minister, Pavel Grachov, pulled up and got out of his ZIL limousine. He had been in the area for quite a while. This may be the first time he's gotten out. It appears he's trying to find out what is happening with the operation, to talk to some of the troops there in the tanks and APCs that you see. Again, a few minutes ago, we saw from our cameras crowds of people leaving the White House. It appears that they may have been evacuating some of the wounded people. We also had a call from a deputy from inside of the White House on a cellular phone who said they are ready to negotiate, but we have heard nothing more about anybody wanting to surrender or asking for official negotiations. Now we go back to business day in New York.
Claire Shipman in Moscow. Now joining us to discuss the impact of the Russian situation on the financial markets is Neil McKinnon. He is the chief economist at Citibank Europe, and he joins us from our London studios. Neil, welcome to Business Day. Would I be right in saying that as long as Boris Yeltsin looks like he's going to win, U.S. investors don't have much to worry about in terms of a sell-off on Wall Street?
Well, President Yeltsin stands for economic and political reform, and I think if that continues, the markets will clearly welcome that. If President Yeltsin loses power and gives way to the so-called hardliners, then there'll certainly be a very big setback for economic reform, and financial markets clearly won't welcome that.
But we do apparently have some people emerging from the Russian parliament building as we speak. In fact, there is some talk of negotiations at this point. All of that presumably is a big plus for the markets, correct?
Well, I think the financial markets are taking the view that President Yeltsin does have things under control, and that some semblance of order is likely to return to the streets of Moscow. And I think in that regard, it's no surprise that certainly during trading time in Europe this morning, that the financial markets have taken a very relaxed view of what's going on at Moscow at the present time.
Neil, CNN's Claire Shipman just reported that CNN had received a cellular phone call from a deputy inside the White House saying that the group in there was ready to negotiate. Would you expect that to spark a rally?
Well, I think the financial markets will certainly welcome that, but I think it's very early at this stage to take too seriously what's going on at the present time. I think the financial markets feel that President Yeltsin has got things under control. I think they'll welcome that, and I think that the markets will look back at economic fundamentals and take their cue from that.
This is, though, the second such crisis for the Russian political system. Are you at all surprised to see the markets calming so quickly?
Well, I think the build-up in tensions that we've seen over the past couple of months as President Yeltsin is trying to push through economic and political reforms has certainly been a focus of interest for Western financial markets and for international investors generally. I think the hope is that President Yeltsin persists and can get through his economic reform package. The alternative is not very pleasant. I think many people feel that if Russia was to turn its back on what was happening, then the opportunities for an improvement in economic welfare generally would be very small.
Neil, we've got this fighting in Moscow. We also have U.S. troops killed in Somalia and a report of an American pilot taken prisoner in Somalia, and yet the price of gold is doing absolutely nothing. Why haven't precious metals reacted more to what's going on around the world?
Well, what we've seen over the past couple of months has been an actual move up in the gold price, perhaps for different reasons. I think that the talk that there would be some cutback in the supply of gold, that there would be an increase in the demand for gold, particularly from China, did push up the price of gold up to $400. There's since been some correction in that. I think that for people to start buying precious metals gold price again, they'd have to get worried about the supply-demand balance in those markets, perhaps get worried that inflation was going to be more of a problem. At the present time, that doesn't look as though it's going to be the case.
But would it be generally true to say that events overseas these days carry less weight with the financial markets than do domestic politics and domestic economics?
Well, I think it's certainly true to say that the so-called safe haven attributes that, say, the US dollar, the price of gold, for example, that have had in the past, I think those safe haven attributes have diminished. There's no doubt about that. Foreign exchange markets, unfortunately, are becoming used to these sorts of events, the Gorbachev coup, the Gulf War, the present situation in Moscow, and I think that they feel that significant and very sharp movements in the price of currencies, bonds, gold, whatever, are not really necessary. So they take a much more relaxed view of international events these days.
Another question just on the currency markets, Neil. We see the dollar up only slightly against the mark and the pound. It's actually down against the yen. Does that reflect the apparent stability that seems to be taking hold in Russia now? Or is it the international community's commentary on the safety of the U.S. dollar as a safe haven?
Well, we saw the US dollar move up to about 165.5 against the German Deutschmark in Tokyo trading time. In London trading time, we saw some slippage to around the 163.5 level. That's the sort of level that we were at close of play on Friday. So for the time being, the financial markets, like most other people, be watching events in Moscow, see how they unfold, and then take decisions on the next direction in the currency.
All right, thank you, Neil. Neil McKinnon of Citibank Europe. And Business Day will be right back with continued live coverage of the crisis in Russia.
To stop a friend from drinking and driving, don't play fair. Play to win.
Got your car keys?
Yeah, they're right, they're just here a second ago.
They'll turn up. I'll call you a
No,
cab.
they're right
Let's
here.
go.
Take the keys, call a cab, take a stand. Friends don't let friends drive drunk.
Who says they don't make them like they used to? Sanitary, chrome steel from top to bottom. This is a heavy-duty vacuum for home. Sanitary by Eureka.
For the select dealer nearest you, 1-800-282-2886.
This one will last for years.
When I decided to fix my porch myself, I couldn't quite believe it. So, who comes to the rescue? Well, handy he's not. And since when did you get all this energy? Ever since you got me started on breakfast with grape nuts. It's like you said, this box is full of great mornings.
Look, it's right here. Fat-free, natural energy source. I said try it a few mornings.
And I did. And it does help keep me going. You know, Dad, I think I have inherited your handiness.
Yeah, I think you inherited my toolkit. That's what he's got.
Post Grape Nut cereal helps keep you going strong all morning long.
Please be seated. The performance is about to begin. The 32-valve, 280 horsepower Lincoln Mark 8. It's like Beethoven with an attitude. Drive everything else first.
The National Organization for Women.
In the eternal search for the truth, you're bound to step on a few toes.
Ross Perot.
To those aggrieved parties, we now offer our apology. Crossfire, weeknights on CNN.
I'm Claire Shipman in Moscow. The standoff here continues after a long night. Just after dawn, tanks and APCs, Boris Yeltsin's tanks and APCs, moved into the White House. For hours, there was heavy fighting around the building. There's been something of a lull lately. The fire that was started by some of the tank fire at the White House seems to be spreading inside of the building. You can see it burning right now. A few minutes ago, they were starting to move what appeared to be some wounded people out of the White House. Some of the people were carrying white flags. There were ambulances nearby, so it seemed that they were trying to remove the wounded, that it wasn't any sort of surrender. And there has, in fact, been no official sign yet that Mr. Khasbalatov or Mr. Rutskoy have any intention of surrendering at this point. And now we go back to Business Day in New York.
That's CNN's Claire Shipman reporting live from Moscow. Russia's closest economic ties are with Germany, so it is that nation's economy that would appear to be most affected by long-term political unrest in Russia. Joining us now to discuss that prospect, among other things, is Dr. Gerhard Leiner. He's Chief Financial Officer of Germany's Daimler-Benz. Good to have you with us, Doctor. Are you surprised that the reaction of the German markets has been relatively calm to this much political turmoil in Russia?
Yes, I'm actually surprised because we are so close to Russia geographically that one should assume that there is a more serious impact.
Right now, it would appear that Mr. Yeltsin has regained the upper hand in this battle. However, if that were to change, what would be the impact on Germany?
Well, I'm pretty sure that that will not only on Germany, but on the whole Europe, and especially the new countries, Eastern Europe, have a very detrimental effect.
Presumably, Germany's real concern here is that there is chaos in Russia and hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of Russians approach the German border as refugees. That is the key concern in Germany, isn't it?
Yes, that's a key concern. The other concern, the long-term consequences, but this would be the short-term consequence. The long-term consequence is that if totalitarism would come back, a dictatorship come back as we had it before, that would probably stop or at least affect negatively the development which is so well in Poland, in the Czech Republic, and in Hungary.
You are the Chief Financial Officer of Mercedes-Benz. You control literally billions of dollars of capital and where it's going to go. Yes. Would you consider at this point putting your company's capital in Russia?
No.
Under no circumstances, at this point?
At this point.
Do you have any capital at risk in Russia as we speak?
We have some capital there, but not at risk. The risk covering is with the federal government of Germany.
And your primary capital assets are in the Czech Republic and in Poland and in the former Eastern Germany, I take it?
Yes.
Okay. As far as the refugee question, if there were to be an influx of refugees from the political uncertainty in Russia, what would the impact be on the labor markets in Germany, where people have already expressed a great deal of anger and concern about refugees?
That's the key issue, because we already have the highest unemployment figure we ever had in our history, or at least history after World War II. We expect an unemployment number of 4.5 million this year. That, of course, would mean that there is no possibility to integrate these refugees immediately or in short term into our work process.
Would you expect then to see politically motivated violence in Germany increase as a result of any
well,
refugees?
I wouldn't exclude that.
Europe at the moment is primarily in recession. There is not many buoyant parts of the economy in Europe. Assuming that Mr. Yeltsin wins this one, presumably the recession in Europe won't get any worse because of what's happened in Russia, will it?
Well, if Boris Yeltsin wins, this is a very positive sign. And everything that happened in Russia, again, I must say, we are so geographically so close to this country, and we have started to have very good economic ties with them. That would be very positive.
Germany would breathe a sigh of relief if Mr. Yeltsin wins?
Absolutely.
One very brief, unrelated question. Daimler-Benz is cutting a great number of jobs in Europe. It is building a plant here in the United States. Is the United States now the low-cost producer for automobiles?
It's one of the low-cost producers. That might be surprising for many people, even for your citizens, but it's a fact. And we found Alabama as being the very appropriate site.
The United States is a safe haven for your capital?
Yes.
Indeed. Dr. Gerhard Lehner, Chief Financial Officer at Daimler-Benz. Thanks indeed for joining us, sir.
Thank you.
Business Day will be right back after this break with continued live coverage of events in Russia.
You are here. He has the traveler's checks here. Think about that. Now think about this. American Express checks for two. The only traveler's checks that either of you can use. Don't leave home without them.
If someone tells you they don't want a landfill in their backyard, ask them if they'd like one of these. What business do we have saying we help the environment? That is our business.
An insurance company insures many things, but mostly it's there to ensure the quality of people's lives. And last year, backed by a $680 million investment from ITT Hartford helped 5 million people by paying for over $5 billion in personal and business losses, one person at a time. If you're looking for insurance, look to the insurance company of ITT. ITT, we're adding more than just our name.
It's going to be different every week.
The King of Talk is coming to weekends. And joining Larry on his premiere broadcast, Hillary Rodham Clinton. Larry's working the weekend.
Oh, come on, this beats work.
Premieres Saturday on CNN.
Get a head start on your day with the latest news reports, business updates from major financial centers, sports scores from the night before, and weather forecasts for the day ahead. Daybreak gives you what you need to rise and shine. Weekday mornings on CNN.
I'm Claire Shipman in Moscow. It's been a long night and morning here. Boris Yeltsin's forces still trying to oust the parliamentarians from the White House. The army moved in just after dawn, shattering the Parliament building with tank fire and gunfire. Not long ago, we saw what appeared to be people leaving the building carrying white flags. We were under the impression that they were attempting to evacuate wounded from the White House. Reuters is reporting that there were 3 men carrying white flags who left the Parliament building simply to join the demonstrators outside. Now, Reuters is also reporting, and we have not confirmed this, that a Yeltsin military aide has said there are 500 dead inside of the Parliament building. Again, that is unconfirmed from Reuters. At this point, you can see the crowds gathering below the White House, still trying to get as close as they can. And now we go back to business day in New York.
CNN's Claire Shipman reporting live from Moscow. And now a rundown of some news from the United States. President Clinton's health care reform plan may not reduce the federal deficit as much as originally projected. The Wall Street Journal says the estimates will be refined. They could project up to $20 billion less deficit reduction over the next 7 years. The White House originally said the plan would reduce the gap by $91 billion over the period. A final draft of the health plan, along with the official cost estimate, is expected later this month.
The president's plan is sparking a wave of consolidations in the healthcare industry. Now, the latest will create by far the biggest U.S. commercial hospital company. Columbia Healthcare and HCA Hospital Corporation of America will merge in a stock swap valued at $5.7 billion. The new company will have revenues exceeding $10 billion. The move, announced this weekend, comes just 1 month after Columbia was created through another merger between Columbia Hospital Corporation and Galen Healthcare.
Another big merger reportedly imminent, this one in the banking industry. According to published reports, KeyCorp and Society Corp, two regional banks, are expected today to announce a merger that would create the United States' 10th largest banking company. The new company would have about 1,000 branch offices nationwide, with combined assets totaling some $58 billion.
Now let's take a quick look at where the markets are right now. Stocks in Europe are having a mildly positive reaction to the events in Russia. Boris Yeltsin appears to have the upper hand. That's a plus for stocks in Europe. At the moment in London, the FT100 share index is up 8 points. In Frankfurt, the DAX index is up 14 points. In Paris, the CAC 40 index is down, but only by a fraction. As for the dollar, not much of a safe haven today. It is, though, slightly higher against the European currencies. Gold and silver prices, they too are only slightly higher.
And that is Business Day for this Monday. I'm Deborah Marchini.
And I'm Stuart Varney in New York. CNN's live coverage of the developments in Russia continues.
This has been a presentation of CNN Business News.
Business Travelers Advisory is brought to you by Goodyear, #1 in tires.
Save right now. Buy 3 Goodyear tires at the regular price, get the 4th tire free. That's right. Buy any 3 of these Goodyear tires at the regular price and get the 4th free. 4 for 3 now. Hurry, savings end soon.
In the 80s, a lot of companies invested their pension funds in questionable real estate. Unfortunately, that's life. In the 80s, we invested most of our pension funds in investment-grade bonds. That's New York Life. New York Life, the company you keep.
Save right now. Buy 3 Goodyear tires at the regular price, get the 4th tire free. That's right. Buy any 3 of these Goodyear tires at the regular price and get the 4th free. 4 for 3 now. Hurry, savings end soon.
I'm Dave Hennon, along with a look at your Business Travelers Advisory. Quiet weather is expected across most of the United States today. We do expect some scattered showers and thunderstorms through South Florida. High pressure dominates much of the west, but we are seeing some fog problems across California. We'll start in the Midwest as we take a look at possible delays today. Mostly clear skies will cover most of the Midwest, but some gusty winds could cause some delays in Chicago during peak hours. In Dallas, 20 to 45 minutes are being experienced right now, delays because of some low clouds and fog in that area. In the east, we do expect delays in Atlanta during peak traffic hours. In Jacksonville, visibility is reduced down to around a quarter-mile visibility and some dense fog, so expect delays in that area. In Miami, some thunderstorms, so some rerouting expected mainly during the afternoon hours. Expect delays in Newark, gusty winds, and delays during peak hours. In the west, Los Angeles, already hour delays this morning due to some dense fog at LAX. In San Francisco, 15-minute delays are being experienced because of some fog, and dense fog also in Seattle Expect delays in that area as well. It's 6:57 in the Midwest, 7:58 in the East. The news continues in just a moment.
Cheryl Ladd on the new bottom-shaping sensation, ShapeMate.
ShapeMate's the quickest, easiest way I have ever found to tone and tighten and sculpt your bottom. First, you slip the ShapeMate under the door. Then you slip the cap over your ankle.
Every time you pull, you're strengthening your gluteus maximus muscles. The ShapeMate cables deliver just the right amount of progressive resistance.
Total body conditioning requires more than just aerobics. I recommend ShapeMate as an effective tool for rounding out your fitness program.
ShapeMate's great for arms, tummy, and waist, and you can take it anywhere.
Don't cover up. Tighten up. With ShapeMate, it works.
ShapeMate comes with 2 cables, an upper body adapter, complete instruction, and a handy carrying bag, all for just $19.95. Send check or money order to this address or order by phone with your credit card and get this pocket nutrition guide absolutely free. Sorry, operators cannot accept COD or bill me orders. Call and order now.
Here he comes again. Ray Stevens is back.
That burns
with a brand new video. Ray Stevens Live.
Great, great, great. I want to see it again.
11 great songs, including Guitarzan. Shriners Convention.
Just #1.
Gotta see it.
I saw Elvis in a UFO.
Saw Elvis in a UFO.
Misty.
Look at me. I'm as helpless as a kitten of a chick.
That musical funny man is loose again. This time live on stage for almost 1 full hour of new zany family entertainment. Here's how to order.
For rush delivery, have your credit card ready and call 1-800-257-1257 or send $19.98 plus $4.50 shipping to Ray Stevens Live, P.O. Box 2919, Atlanta, Georgia, or call 1-800-257-1257.
This is CNN.
Black smoke from an assault on Russia's White House. Day 14 of Russia's political crisis begins literally with a bang.
Oh. Did you see that? Tank has opened fire on the front of the White House. A T-72 tank has fired twice into the front of the White House. The tank is on the bridge at Kutuzovsky Prospect.
Good morning, I'm Bob Kane, and this is CNN's continuing coverage of the crisis in Moscow. Reuters news agency is quoting an aide to Russian President Boris Yeltsin. In fact, his chief military aide is saying there are an estimated 500 dead bodies inside the White House in Moscow, the Parliament building. There is at least a lull right now in the battle at the Parliament building. Some people have emerged carrying a white flag. There is talk of negotiations. Pavel Grachev, the defense minister, has arrived at the scene. He alighted from a limousine outside, and it appeared at the same time some people, perhaps casualties of the fighting, were being removed from the White House. CNN correspondent Claire Shipman is in Moscow and joins us now with the very latest. Claire?
Bob, we have heard those same reports that, in fact, not long ago, deputies emerged from the White House waving white flags, asking to negotiate with Pavel Grachev. Not long ago, we saw the defense minister in the crowds. He seemed to be talking to the troops. He was walking around the tanks and trying to break through the large crowds that have gathered at the end of the Kutuzovsky Prospect Bridge. Those crowds have been trying to force their way into the White House for most of the day. They've had some success. They've broken through some of the barricades. As you can see now, there are troops standing down there trying to keep those crowds back. At one point, it looked as though they might all sweep across the bridge, but they have been forced back. We've also had reports earlier that a deputy called our office from a cellular telephone, identified himself as a deputy, and said that the people inside wanted to negotiate. We, of course, were not able to confirm that phone call, but he identified himself as a deputy. Again, there has been no official attempt at any point by Mr. Khasbalatov or Mr. Rutskoy yet to ask for any surrender into the 8th hour of this crisis. easily imaginable in much of the former Soviet Union, but certainly not in the middle of downtown Moscow. The attack on the Russian parliament building began just after dawn. Boris Yeltsin true to his word when he promised to regain control of the city. By midday, the White House was completely surrounded by tanks and APCs. Scenes easily imaginable in much of the former Soviet Union, but certainly not in the middle of downtown Moscow. The attack on the Russian parliament building began just after dawn. Boris Yeltsin true to his word when he promised to regain control of the city. By midday, the White House was completely surrounded by tanks and APCs. The gunfire of the heavily armed parliament defenders and return fire could be heard throughout the morning. The White House, after a brutal assault by tanks, in flames, along with the city building across the street. The violence was ratcheted up in Moscow when hardline demonstrators broke through the government lines Sunday at the parliament and started a rampage at the parliament and the television tower, which left at least 20 dead and 100 injured. Boris Yeltsin offered legislators one final chance to surrender late Sunday night, but they refused. There were reports Monday that Alexander Rutskoy and Ruslan Khasbulatov were ready to talk, but not surrender. There are no firm statistics yet on the dead and wounded in Monday's violence. On the streets around the battle zone Monday morning, pedestrians seemed stunned. It's so uncivilized, he said, embarrassing that a country as great as ours would have this happen in its capital. The scene, with tanks lining the streets leading to the White House, was strangely reminiscent of the August coup 2 years ago. But this time, few were begging the soldiers to stop, but rather urging them on. Most, although troubled by the violence, seemed unanimous in their support for the Russian leader. The deputies had no right to do what they did, she says. I think Yeltsin is even being too soft on them. The soldiers themselves said no question about whose side they're on, but they too wished it could have been otherwise. I'm worried about my men, said this senior lieutenant. I just wish we could have solved it peacefully. I think Russia is sick of these constant wars. We are told at this moment by the Reuters news agency that the defense minister, Mr. Grachev, is outside of the White House holding talks with some of the deputies who are interested in some sort of surrender. Now, at the moment, there is substantial support for Boris Yeltsin on the streets, and a lot of this violence may be able to be blamed on the parliament. But when the toll of all of this becomes clear, especially if there are as many as 500 dead inside, the Russian leader could find himself a much less popular man. Bob?
Claire, that reported figure of 500, as you note, has not been independently confirmed by Russian officials. But does it not seem, on the face of it, a little high to you?
It does indeed. I was very surprised to hear that figure because although the sounds have been dramatic and the gunfire has indeed been dramatic, the White House is really like a fortress, and it would be very hard for people to be injured unless they were right next to windows. And we were also told that the special forces that went inside to try to clear the White House out had orders not to hurt anybody unless they were being fired upon themselves. Again, we are just being told, Bob, that Grachev is at the White House. He has just arrived in front of the White House to hold talks.
Would it be your inference, Claire, that if he is negotiating with deputies from inside, that they are negotiating on behalf of all those inside?
That's hard to say. It would seem that they might be. There aren't that many deputies inside, and we've heard rumors over the morning that, in fact, Khasbulatov and Rutskoy both want to talk. They never wanted to use the word surrender, but they have continually said they're ready to talk. So it would seem that they know they're outnumbered, and it's really their only option at this point.
Claire, do you see the same picture, the armored personnel carrier that we're getting here? It looks like some ranking military men may be there. Can you tell us who that is?
Yes, I think that is the group with Pavel Grachev, and he is indeed among that group right now outside of the front of the White House, Bob.
Do you have any idea, Claire, what has brought them to this crux now, all of a sudden? And I'm thinking of the many disparate shades of political thought and bent that there are represented in the White House?
Well, I think that they realized simply that they really had no other option at this point but to negotiate. They're completely outgunned. The Army has made it clear to us on the streets that they absolutely support Yeltsin, although Rutskoy had said all along he thought he had some support in the Army and that the Army would never fire on its own people. We've seen that that's not true. I think they just felt that this is the only way out if they are, in fact, negotiating now.
I know you've had your hands full there this morning, overnight, and yesterday as well, but have you been able to talk with any of the pro-Parliament demonstrators who have rushed the building today? I'm wondering what their thinking was.
We have talked to a few of them. We talked to some of them who were coming out the other way. The few that we talked to are very angry. They were very hostile. One of them threatened to knock our camera over and break it. So a lot of the people around there are not in a very rational state. They're either extreme right-wing in fascist groups here or extreme left-wing communists. They're not the ordinary Muscovites.
Claire Shipman in Moscow. It is now nearly 9 minutes past the hour. Troop and armor reinforcements entered Moscow early this morning following fierce fighting at the Ostankino Television Center yesterday. Troops and tanks surrounded the Parliament building, some soldiers going in and some tanks opening fire.
Whoa. Did you see that tank has opened fire on the front of the White House? A T-72 tank has fired twice.
Tank shells blasted holes in the side of the White House, and they were answered by automatic weapons fire from inside. No sign of any of the military units in the city supporting the dissident lawmakers. Helicopters buzzed over the White House. Armored personnel carriers disgorged troops, including some elite black berets, some paratroopers as well. Troops loyal to Boris Yeltsin worked their way through the corridors on the lower floors of the huge building. Some men carrying white flags left the Parliament building, as we have noted a short while ago, and joined a crowd of legislative supporters outside. And as we have noted, Reuters News Service is quoting a military aide to Boris Yeltsin as saying there are an estimated 500 dead bodies in the White House. Official confirmation of that is yet to come. President Yeltsin launched today's commando and tank assault on the Parliament building attack after a television address in which he accused his hardline opponents of attempting a weekend coup.
This armed rebellion is doomed to restore peace, law and order, and calm troops are being pulled in Moscow. Their objective is to liberate the premises that have been seized by the criminal elements, to disarm the illegal armed formations and neutralize them. I'm asking you, distinguished Muscovites, to give your moral support to the Russian officers and soldiers.
Our coverage of events in Moscow and other news continues after this.
Hey, I'll try Sunny D.
Some good stuff.
Hey, 2 kinds of Sunny D.
Some kids love the rich, tangy taste of original Sunny Delight, but other kids prefer California style with its lighter texture and smoother orange taste.
I'll take original. Make mine California. Hey, wait up.
Sunny Delight, original Florida citrus punch and lighter texture California style.
There are lots of reasons to buy life insurance. Here are 2 great ones. I'm State Farm Agent Mike Foy. As the Goff family has grown, so have their life insurance needs. That's why we get together for family insurance checkups. I make sure to explain all the options, then they decide on the plan that's right for them. Ask your State Farm agent for a family insurance checkup. It's a great way to learn about life.
Save right now. Buy 3 Goodyear tires at the regular price, get the 4th tire free. That's right. Buy any 3 of these Goodyear tires at the regular price and get the 4th free. 4 for 3 now. Hurry, savings end soon.
State finals coming up. A lot of pressure to win. I don't eat right, I get irregular, so I don't project a winning attitude, and the boys see that. I tried some natural bulk fiber, but I couldn't take all that grit. Then I discovered smooth texture Metamucil. No grit in the mix or the taste. Easy to get the extra fiber I need every day to stay regular. You got a winning attitude, you win, if you're lucky.
Smooth texture Metamucil, the natural choice for regularity.
Sam is going to show you why my Dirt Devil stick vac is so special. That's right, it digs dirt out of tough places with its unique triangular head. It's a Dirt Devil exclusive. Like us. Get the new Dirt Devil stick vac.
Continuing to put into perspective what is going on and has gone on in Moscow, there was a pitched battle yesterday for control of Russia's main television center. Here's what that looked like. That gunfire was very real. People were shot and killed and wounded. For a while, control of the building was divided and the station went off the air. The fighting around the heart of Moscow has taken a heavy toll on all sides, and ambulances and hospitals have been scrambling to keep up with the injured. The flashpoint of Russia's political crisis came at midday on Sunday, when thousands of anti-Yeltsin demonstrators clashed with government troops. For several hours Sunday, it appeared the anti-Yeltsin forces had the upper hand. Opposition leader Alexander Rutskoy called on his supporters to storm the television station and take over the mayor's office. At one point, a Rutskoy supporter marched through the crowd with a handful of keys apparently taken during a raid on the mayor's office. But at sunset Sunday, after declaring a state of emergency, Yeltsin began mustering his forces for today's assault. President Clinton says he is getting hourly updates on the situation in Moscow. The president spent the night in San Francisco, and CNN correspondent Jill Doherty is traveling with him. She joins us now with an update. Jill.
Well, Bob, in spite of the violence in Moscow, President Clinton has decided to stick with his originally scheduled 3-day trip to California to promote his health care plan and defense conversion. At the present time, as you said, he is in San Francisco, and he has been getting regular updates from his national security staff, both here and back in Washington. While in California, he's spoken out several times in support of President Boris Yeltsin. Last night in Sacramento at a town hall meeting, televised town hall meeting on domestic issues, President Clinton predicted Yeltsin would win the confrontation with his opponents.
President Yeltsin has bent over backwards not to have the soldiers fire on anybody, not to promote any violence. And he may be thinking today he went too far in that because they basically got up ahead of steam and the situation got out of control. I believe that he will be successful in the end because the people support him. And I think the United States should support Yeltsin as long as he is the person who embodies a commitment to democracy and to letting the Russian people chart their own course. And he does. The people who have started this opposition are people who represent the old communist system that Russia is trying so hard to move away from.
The Clinton administration has moved from general statements of support for Boris Yeltsin to tacitly giving the Russian leader the green light to use force if necessary to settle the situation. And one senior administration official said that the U.S. had felt all along that President Yeltsin would and should do what is necessary to avoid widespread violence. I'm Jill Doherty, CNN, reporting live from San Francisco.
Jill, the last we heard, Mr. Clinton had not talked with Mr. Yeltsin. Has that changed?
That has not changed. We have to bear in mind that it is still very early here in San Francisco, but as of the last time we heard, he had not yet spoken with him.
Jill Doherty in San Francisco. Many other world leaders are also backing Boris Yeltsin, although some were concerned the shooting in Moscow could lead to a wider conflict. Russia's giant neighbor to the south, China, said It was deeply concerned and hoped for an early end to the conflict. A short time ago, the European community issued a statement supporting Yeltsin while deploring the loss of life. It said the rebels bore much of the responsibility. It was 9:46 in the morning today, Moscow time, when the first tank fire was aimed at the Russian White House. Here's how that played out.
Almost like an elevator shaft.
Did you see that? Tank has opened fire on the front of the White House. A T-72 tank has fired twice into the front of the White House. The tank is on the bridge at Kutuzovsky Prospect.
Seeing that they...
That was from a tank.
Yet another shot from the cannon of a T-72 tank into the front of the Russian White House. Eileen and I are now crouching on our roof here because we can see return fire coming out of the White House.
You can see heavy damage from that.
T-80?
It may have been a T-80 tank that hit that front of the White House. You can see some heavy damage to the windows up there. Those are offices of the deputies. They are offices of some of the staff of the White House. Many of the staff of the White House had left, but many of them had remained. Most of the staff were women. They had been serving upstairs in the buffet in the cafeteria, and that was at the top floor of the White House.
You can still hear small arms fire from around back of the White House. Bruce Conover is on the camera over there showing us those pictures. Up here on the roof with us, Paul Dietrich, taking pictures of the tanks. Steve Harrigan, we have two cameras.
There are more tanks now coming down Kutuzovsky Prospect.
More tanks are coming down Kutuzovsky Prospect, Jonathan.
Well, maybe we can get a camera to show us them while we're looking around. We have tape of that first blast on the building. We can have a look at it now. This is not tape. This is a live picture of tanks or armored vehicles advancing very, very quickly to the building.
They're approaching the other side of the river from the building.
While this is going on the street from the inside of the building, it says that Alexander Rutskoy would like negotiations with Yeltsin. Now, the Reuters news agency reporting that apparently the fire so far may have been enough to change a few minds inside that building. Rutskoy, the vice president, a former Yeltsin ally who Yeltsin fired, and who finds himself with the hardline lawmakers inside that building, up till now unwilling to negotiate, now prepared to negotiate.
I suspect that we won't see Boris Yeltsin in a mood to negotiate at this point until we see Alexander Rutskoy walk out of that building with his hands on his head.
You're watching as a battle unfolds in the streets of Moscow for the Russian parliament. A handful of hardline lawmakers, perhaps 100 or 200, with their supporters well armed inside that building, until now holding out against President Boris Yeltsin, but at last report willing to negotiate with him to try and defuse this crisis.
These are black berets on top of these tanks that are going down Kutuzovsky Prospect. They're waving aside photographers and press.
Okay, there, Jonathan,
Here comes
3
the
helicopters high in the sky over the Russian White House. Paul Dietrich's camera showing you 3 helicopters high in the sky over the Russian White House. They appear almost to be ready to hover at this point.
Mr. Yeltsin had said this earlier this morning that he wanted negotiations again, but that the defenders of the White House and Mr. Rutskoy had to lay down their arms. If Mr. Rutskoy does want negotiations now, that will be a precondition. They must come out and lay down their arms.
If these helicopters are carrying paratroopers, I would expect that we would see them piling out before long. The helicopters are far enough to the west of the White House now that the prevailing wind out of the west would carry sending troops about to the building. We don't know if that's going to happen, speculation at this point. But certainly they're in a place right now where if men jumped, the wind would carry them in the direction of the White House. They're about, I guess, a half mile now west of the White House, high in the sky. Small arms fire continues around the White House. We watch these three helicopters.
If men do emerge from those helicopters, they face, as Eileen told us earlier, the possibility, at least, of sniper fire from the roof of the White House.
That's absolutely correct, Jonathan. There were many men up there, about a dozen every night, sometimes less, depending on how cold it was and how they thought things were going. Those helicopters are literally above our heads right now. We can't get them right now from our camera position because they are right above our heads.
As we listen to those helicopters overhead, these motorized howitzers carrying Black Beret troops are on the move again, moving across the bridge on Kutuzovsky Prospect. They are headed directly for a line of water tank trucks that are used to wash Moscow streets. You see fleeing in front of them some bystanders who had been gawking from the bridge there watching this activity. They've gone by those two T-80 tanks, which have opened fire from the front of the White House building.
That 9:52 a.m. Moscow time, we remind you, translates to about 2:52 a.m. in New York, Washington, or Atlanta. Our coverage of events in Moscow and elsewhere continues after this.
Nokia. It remembers because it's human to forget.
Maria?
Nokia. Connecting people.
Today, a lot of credit cards charge you fat interest rates. Discover Card has changed all that. With Smart Rate, the more you use your Discover Card for purchases, the lower your interest rate can be. Now as low as 14.9%, plus cashback bonus and no annual fee. Discover Card. The only thing we're heavy on is value. It pays to Discover, the card that pays you back.
We're using high-resolution robotic cameras in order to give you a closer look at the fit and finish of our Lincoln cars. To achieve this kind of quality, we not only employ technologically advanced machines, we also employ dedicated people who bring to Lincoln a craftsmanship that can't be duplicated by a mere machine. Sorry, fellas. Lincoln, what a luxury car should be.
To be a Blue Ribbon champion, you've got to get up pretty early. And helping Jan get a jump on her day is decaffeinated Folgers Crystals with that great waking up aroma. Aroma that starts with mountain-grown beans, fresh brewed, then crystallized. Coffee darker than the other leading decaffeinated. Darkness that signals all the eye-opening aroma and rich taste to come. Decaffeinated Folgers Crystals.
The best part of waking up is Folgers in your cup.
There have been signs over the past half hour or so of a possible denouement to the crisis in Moscow. Let's go live to correspondent Claire Shipman, who's there. Claire.
Bob, well, we've had more word from Yeltsin's military advisor, Dmitry Volkogonov, again through the Reuters news agency. He said that altogether there have been about 700 military men involved in this, 10 tanks, some other APCs. He said that, in fact, when the special troops entered the White House, if the people inside immediately put their hands up and dropped their guns and surrendered, they were not hurt. But again, that figure is still being quoted of at least 500 inside dead. Volkogonov also said there can be no guarantees for those who started this bloodshed, and by that he probably means Mr. Rutskoy and Mr. Hasbulatov. And what you may be able to see now from one of our cameras are pictures outside of the White House. Troops are gathering among the demonstrators there. The demonstrators have been trying to push back and forth from the front of the White House. They seem to have pushed their way in. Again, they're not all demonstrators. Many of them have just come as onlookers trying to get in closer. The troops have not been able to keep them back, and as the gunfire goes off, as you hear the sniper fire, they've been rushing back one way or the other. There's no way to tell if people are being crushed or hurt in that crowd at all. What we're seeing now is a picture from the back of the White House, some tanks and APCs still there at the back of the White House, but again, no movement. It appears there may be some sort of negotiating underway. Bob?
Claire Shipman in Moscow, and we will continue our coverage with, most immediately, a business news update after this.
The National Organization for Women, ACLU. Senator Robert Dole.
In the eternal search for the truth, you're bound to raise some eyebrows, step on a few toes, butt heads.
The Young Republicans. The U.S. Congress.
So if we've inadvertently offended anyone along the way, Pat, Michael, and John would like to offer their most sincere apologies. Crossfire, weeknights on CNN. Lively talk, healthy debate.
Michael Crawford brings you the power and passion of Andrew Lloyd Webber. Set your spirits soaring with one of the greatest voices of our time.
The dawn was breaking, the world was waking.
13 of Andrew Lloyd Webber's most memorable songs. Michael Crawford and the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra.
Power of the music of the night.
Feel the power.
This is CNN.
Let us look now at how the financial markets are taking the events in Moscow and elsewhere. Stuart Varney's at the Business News Desk in New York. Stuart.
All right, Bob, let's start with stocks. They are mostly higher in Europe. Bloodshed in Russia, yes, but traders feel that President Boris Yeltsin will prevail. That is a plus for stocks. In London, the FT100 share index is up 15 points at 3,054. In Frankfurt, the DAX is up 12 points. In Paris, the CAC 40 down only slightly, down just a point. As for Wall Street, well, traders of U.S. stocks in London predict a steady opening for the Dow Industrials as the situation in Russia appears to stabilize in Mr. Yeltsin's favor. As for Treasury bonds, they're holding steady in London. Right now, the 30-year bond down 2/32, the yield 5.99%. The dollar only slightly higher now against Europe's currencies. As investors seek something of a safe haven, the dollar actually is down a bit against the Japanese yen. Oil prices a little higher as fears of disruption of oil production in Russia fade. Britain's North Sea crude oil is up 10 cents at $17.40 a barrel. Gold and silver prices leading to the plus side, but only just. Gold up 70 cents an ounce at $355.70. There is other news apart from Russia. There will be some stocks to watch when Wall Street opens today. Columbia Healthcare and the Hospital Corporation of America. Columbia plans to buy HCA for $5.7 billion in stock. The deal will create the biggest commercial healthcare provider in the world. That's the latest in financial news. We'll be back in an hour to see how Wall Street reacts to the events overseas. I'm Stuart Varney at the CNN Business News Desk in New York.
There is new fighting reported today in the capital of Somalia, and there are unconfirmed reports that at least one American soldier is being held hostage. All this follows a big assault yesterday in Mogadishu by UN forces against troops loyal to Somali warlord Mohammed Farah Aidid. CNN correspondent Jamie McIntyre joins us from the Pentagon with an update. Jamie.
Bob, it's not over, and the casualty toll could go higher. That's the word from the Pentagon this morning. The U.S. Army major serving as UN military spokesman in Mogadishu said as dawn broke there that the fighting continues as the UN pushes ahead with a major operation aimed at breaking the back of Mohammed Farah Aidid's political structure in South Mogadishu. So far, there are still only 5 confirmed deaths of U.S. troops, all believed to have been in one of 2 Army Black Hawk helicopters shot down yesterday. The second helicopter had to be surrounded by about 70 Army Rangers before wounded crew members could be evacuated in the middle of the night last night. This is the heaviest loss of American lives in a single day of fighting, and there are reports, as yet unconfirmed, that 1 U.S. soldier may have been taken prisoner and that the remains of an American serviceman were paraded around through the streets of Mogadishu. The attack began late yesterday on the Aidid stronghold in the Bakara market section, but the UN spokesman insists Aidid was not the target. 24 of his supporters were detained, including several described as key militia members. Somali casualties are said to be high, perhaps in the hundreds. One Red Cross report put the number at near 500. President Clinton expressed sorrow for the loss of American lives as he arrived in California yesterday for an electronic town meeting.
My deepest condolences go to the families and the friends of those brave young Americans.
Clinton called the overall mission a success, while at the same time his defense secretary is looking for ways to get U.S. combat troops home faster.
There's a lot of need for American forces in lots of parts of the world, and we would like not to stay in Somalia, and we certainly are not going to stay more than we're needed.
And even before the latest casualties, many in Congress were saying enough is enough.
What we have now is the ultimate worst case. We have reduced greatly our military power and expanded the mission.
I think we should get out of Somalia. I think we've accomplished our objective.
It is early afternoon now in Mogadishu, and it appears the fighting is still going on. While it seems the UN has inflicted heavy losses on Aidid's forces, it seems equally clear that by again eluding capture and killing American soldiers, the warlord has scored a psychological victory in his effort to weaken U.S. political support for what is now clearly a guerrilla war in Somalia. Bob?
Jamie, there are some highly emotionally charged elements to this latest incident, including the reported holding of 1 U.S. Troop or soldier hostage, the reported parading of the body of another on a wheelbarrow through the streets of the city. Does any of this argue for some sharper, dramatic action by the Pentagon?
Well, of course, this has been the danger all along, and right now the emphasis of the Pentagon, particularly the Clinton administration, is finding a way to quickly resolve the situation and get out of Mogadishu. President Clinton has been pushing Defense Secretary Aspen to find ways to lower the profile of American troops. Now, this would seem to go against that kind of strategy. And just speculating, one might look at this and say, well, sensing the political winds in Washington, that UN commanders on the ground in Mogadishu may have sensed that they may have just a limited time left if they really want to try to capture Aidid and isolate his political faction. So this might have been a last-ditch stab, but it's hard to tell at this point and this many miles away.
All right, thank you, Jamie. The U.S. Supreme Court opens its new term today. The justices will tackle 3 voting rights cases that could clarify the Voting Rights Act of 1965 and issue what it takes to ensure minorities have an equal voice at the polls. Illinois Republican Bob Michel reportedly will not seek a 20th term in Congress next year. The Peoria Journal-Star quotes unidentified staff members for the story and says Michel will announce his retirement plans later today. Michel's 70. He's been House Minority Leader since 1980. Firefighters in Southern California used entertainer Michael Jackson's property to help fight a huge wildfire. They entered his ranch yesterday and set back fires to block an advancing blaze in Los Padres National Forest. They were able to surround most of the 40,000-acre fire and finally declared the effort successful. Authorities say no buildings on Jackson's ranch were threatened. They expect the fire to be under control by Friday night. Opening statements are scheduled to begin today in the trial of 4 men accused of conspiring to bomb the World Trade Center. That February 26th explosion killed 6 people and injured more than 1,000. The 4 men accused in the bombing are all Muslim fundamentalists. The trial's expected to last for several months. A Palestinian blew himself up in a suicide car bomb attack on an Israeli bus today. It happened near an Israeli military headquarters in the occupied West Bank. Army radio reports said the driver rammed the car packed with explosives into the bus. At least 23 people, mainly passengers, were reported injured. The driver was identified as a member of an Islamic group opposed to the Israeli PLO agreement signed last month in Washington. Tons of relief supplies are pouring into India today to help survivors of the earthquake 5 days ago. The town of Killarney was among the hardest hit by the quake. Today, as India's Prime Minister toured the town, Killarney residents broke through security lines and begged him to rebuild their homes. Throughout southwestern India, the focus has shifted to helping those who survived the quake. U.S. military transport planes have brought tons of water jugs, tents, and medicine into the area. In a late development, a 19-month-old girl was reportedly pulled from the rubble today in the town of Killarney. Well, when it comes to learning a new job, many people say hands-on experience is the best way to go. But what if you're training to be a dentist, and that hands-on experience involves making human guinea pigs out of patients? Jeff Flock tells us about an alternative approach in our medical report.
Drilling with no pain. No, it's not Novocaine.
We can bring the patient torso into a position where we can work.
It's a dummy. And as they say, you can learn a lot from a dummy.
Inside the patient's head, we have artificial teeth.
Dental training sure has come a long way.
We had no cheeks, we had no chest, we had no face, so we were really working on something that really didn't simulate a patient. It simulated the mouth, but not the patient.
Now, Northwestern University dental students are drilling and filling some of the nation's most sophisticated artificial patients.
The cheeks are pliable, just like on a real patient.
They are getting rave reviews.
You feel conscious about what you're doing. You're not just yanking. You really feel like maybe there's a nerve in there and you really want to be careful with it.
If you're working with the mannequins, actually the facial, the cheeks are there, so actually it's just like you're working with a patient.
The simulators are part of a new $3 million dental lab at Northwestern that is billed as beyond state-of-the-art.